Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. A quick reminder to support the Rebel transmission. You can do that by becoming a paid subscriber on Substack. $5 a month, $50 a year. We're doing supporter only Zoom calls once a week or so, and stuff like that. You can buy me a coffee or do donor box as well. We're joined today by Tim Pickles, who works in commercial finance as a finance and strategy consultant, and he's got a lot of interesting things to say on the economy, energy, and so forth. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Hey, Hermie. Thanks very much for having me. It's exciting to finally try and get this down in some form. I suppose the short story we would say, after 12 years of, the classic life, and a good career, I decided to take a sabbatical. I was going to go traveling, I hadn't done anything like that in my youth. And in the time there was news about Venezuela and the crisis it was in, and I reflected, because the first time in my life I didn't have to go to work and I had time to think, how could that be? How could this country with more oil than anyone else and relatively easy accessible, how could it find itself where people were? I think the story that I read was just horrific. Was that people were crossing over the mountains to get into Colombia, and there was a mother with a child, and they've frozen to death, on the top, trying to make it over on the night. Basically, it was a story of a mother who's crossing over the top of the mountains, the Andes, to reach Colombia, and she'd frozen to death with a child in her arms. I was like, what on earth is happening? And I took it upon myself just to do something that we don't do. I realize a lot. We don't have time to check, to really get into what we are told is happening in the world. And this just seems counterintuitive to what we would expect. They have lots of oil. How can they not make it work? It's the one thing that we buy, in bucket loads. It's the engine of everything. And how could they not make it work? And so I suppose that began sort of something that profoundly changed me in terms of what I've come to realize, I think, and that's what I'll take people through. But, I think you come to sort of a cautionary tale, but, COVID is part of it. The question, that it becomes is, the line in the Matrix, what if I told you there is no spoon, right? And it's about how we perceive our very reality. And how it's a product of our perception, and that is driven by our understanding of what you think you observe, right? So it's not necessarily what you think you observe is conditioned in terms of you're told to understand it in certain ways more than you actually observe it and come to a conclusion. So it's taken me in many different directions, and I think there aren't many generalists anymore. You don't have many people talking about how things fit together, and complexity is part of life. But, what is the grand plan? What are we doing? How are we making use of our time? And does it work? Is it coherent? Does it have a future that's viable? And, I think you come to some slightly, I've come to reach a very profound conclusion, which is that I believe that we live in a hyper reality that's not based in actual objective truth. I think we live in, like all of those that have gone before us, we live under narratives. We tell ourselves stories to give life purpose, meaning, and keep order. And that is that patchwork of fictions that it's engineered. Because it has to be. It's part of the role of power is to create the narrative that delivers the order, even though we can recognize that it's not necessarily just. It just, the line that most people will have is, well, I know it's not fair, but what can I do? So we sort of just persist in these sort of, a system that's got parameters that are set. They're not random. And it's essential that they're set as well, because I think if we knew the truth, I doubt, because of the fundamental reason why, what I've come to conclude, the reason, the nature of humanity cannot face truth. And if it knew it, we'd have chaos. So I think we live in a hyper reality that's been engineered, curated to save time, to buy us some time, to save civilization from a fate that history tells us no civilization has yet conquered, that it will collapse. There is no recipe that anyone has that is guaranteed to give us a sustainable civilization that can last, that doesn't fall victim to, essentially the tyranny of the masses, which is what everyone does. At some point, enough people are not invested in the system, and they will create their next narrative with whatever ideas they're in to justify what they do. And we are at the very delicate stage of something, because we live in a global world. We have reached the borders, that we found the limits of the system, and there's no more virgin territories. So, with 8 billion people interdependent, and what is the path for growth for everyone? What is the system that keeps everyone together? And I think I'll take you through it, but I think we're in a very delicate stage, and it's time for people to start standing up and making, having a difficult conversation, and hopefully raising awareness to find some people that want to join, to recognize the problem and want to try and do something about it before we maybe tip into a situation where we can't get ourselves back. And that is the risk. We really will end up in a situation that could be the new Dark Ages, because of our nature. It becomes, kill or be killed. And that's what history tells us. So, excited to be here. It's going to be, hopefully interesting for people. And, I started a blog in COVID because I was like, COVID made no sense. And that was sort of the journey. And let me take you through it.
Yeah. And so you and I were thrown into this Twitter group, which is fascinating, that is focusing on energy, the economy, the climate stuff, the COVID stuff, and trying to make sense of what is really going on. And I find all of this stuff is interlinked. What happened with the pandemic, it had really undertones that were related to the financial system going under, right? Money printing. And so really, a lot of people focus, when they think about the pandemic, they focus on the medical stuff, and it's almost like that might not even be the core real focus of it. It's more the financial system going under, and energy and resources. And so I'm getting on people like yourself to help us make sense of what is really happening and going on. So if you want to help us figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just plug. So this is I'm truly grateful for the fact you've had me on, because it's not a topic that many people want to get into, because I think some of the truth that it unearths, or certainly questions that need answers, do not have pleasant solutions. They are not pleasant realities, and that has always been a problem for us. I started my blog in COVID, because I just felt like, to the point of be the man in the arena. Okay, like, it's a sort of responsibility on all of us to call out bullshit and say, hang on a second, this makes no sense, right? And to ask for evidence, and before we career into things, the famous phrase, fuck around and find out. Okay, we're in a planet with 8 billion people, and we rely on systems that we do not understand, right? The complexities that are built into this world and how we behave have basically formed a state of equilibrium, by and large, that is able to shift, but at such a pace that the systems broadly move slow enough that we can adopt and adapt, and we can keep everything in order. And when COVID came along, and I wrote my blog in the age of entitlement, because there is I don't know how, whether it's maybe the people that have done it themselves, whether it's been encouraged, but this idea that there's always a solution that means you don't lose. right? That if a problem comes up, it is the job of government or somebody else to solve it, and it's because you didn't cause it, you can't be made worse off. And it just sort of like it reflects a fundamental loss. The Oscar Wilde, people know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. There are certain things that have got us here, and we have to defend them. And we've made these choices that are so vast to the system, and we're starting to see the consequences, right? That people are saying, inflation stuff. We printed money to pay for us to stay at home. We shut down output. You're going to have more money chasing goods. You're going to get inflation. Okay? That is a known effect. But no one told you that at the time. No, the central bankers, no the politicians, right? Everybody was like, we need to do it, right? And it was for a threat, unpleasant as it is, and it doesn't matter if it came from a lab or whether it was natural at this stage, right? It appeared, it happened, right? But then we've got a question, which is, we've got to deal with this threat, but not in isolation. We have civilization to keep going. And this idea of lockdowns, that let's stay at home, right? Right. So we spent, I think, God knows how much now, but 40 trillion, whatever, right? Just an immense amount of money. Okay. And if another virus appeared tomorrow, okay, we couldn't do it, right? Countries are up to their eyeballs, right? The monetary system is at the stage of, it doesn't make sense. Right? We are up to our eyeballs in debt. So we chose something that couldn't be repeated. So why is that even a solution? Right? You go to war, you fight a war, and the reason why you're prepared to go all in theory, is because you're not prepared to make a deal with the devil. There are some things that there are things that you think matter above all else, and that's why you do it. Yeah, in COVID's case, we weren't defending anything, right? People still don't have a comprehension. We didn't defend anything. We talk about saving lives, but the cruel reality is that we knew that it targeted specific groups, and we could have, they could have stayed at home. We knew the risk was not that great to many people, and the cost to shut down is now causing immense misery. There are huge health implications, capacity problems in societies because you can't get the time back. So, we got waiting lists in health systems. We've got problems. People killed themselves because they hadn't had any help. These were the last months on Earth for many people, right? And we locked them in rooms. It's beyond savage in terms of what we chose to do in the name of saving lives. But then, however many people, 3 billion people live on next to nothing. And they depend on our consumption. They have no welfare states, right? They are on the edge of hunger. And so when we all shut down, when we, stayed at home to save lives, I'm sorry, we stayed at home and we killed people, right? They might not have been your friends and your family. And you might have thought you were acting out of good. But, the number of people facing starvation is, it's almost doubled. And the ramifications of the global economy that we're now in, and some of the situations that are arising, you could argue Russia was encouraged by COVID, right, to take moves in Europe because did we have the will to fight, right? So we looked indebted and maybe not prepared to fight. We looked weak. So maybe encourage that. And that caused energy prices to spike and fertilizer costs. And now we buy the fertilizer, so we secure our food. And the people at the bottom are screwed again. And there's no mention of it on your media. And there should be enough intelligent people out there to call this out, to call the bullshit. So, even now we have people that are cult-like in their determination to say lockdowns worked. By what measure? By what measure are we have ruined lives because we can't get the time back. Children's education cannot be recovered. We can't just start school years again because there's another year coming through. We can't build that capacity. we're going to try and deal with those capacity issues by devoting money that should have gone on building new things. So we're slowing ourselves down to catch back up. It's all in all, it's terrible. And, there's a lot of complaints around, the rise of the elites in COVID. Well, if you shut down your local businesses and say you can only buy from the global multinationals who can deliver relatively automated, who do you think is going to win? Right? It's cause and effect. It's going to happen. And to complain about it, what have you got? Everyone, we could have, protected the vulnerable, but the rest of us had to get on with it. There are bigger problems that will come our way, and we need to face into them. And we just dropped everything for one thing, and it was so illogical. So the age of entitlement is why I started, to tell my blog, because we seem to be in the state of, no problem is my concern, and somebody else should sort it. And that's not responsible citizenry.
Well, one of the themes I gather from your commentary is decline. To get your thoughts on where is the global financial system, the structure of power. I hate the term because Club of Rome came up with it. Limits to growth, but when it comes to energy and the complex system that we have, I've had on Gregory Copley. I very much enjoyed my interview with him, where he talks about the age of democracy being over. So we see many things in decline. Democracy is in decline. Governments are in decline. That would then mean that the economy is in decline, probably related as well to energy use. And so what is sort of really going on? And then where do you feel we are in terms of danger, when it comes to our standards of living now going to have to decline?
Yeah. So it's a funny thing, because when we sort of take a step back and we think about where we are, and we look at the world, one of the problems is we see it through our own eyes. Okay. And that comes with just impossible amounts of bias, because we're all aware, certainly I hope that people in the West are, that we are just like the luckiest people ever. We find ourselves by nothing more than birth luck, luck of where we were born, to have arrived in, nations that have, through great processes, some really incredible people and rightly revered, the founding fathers, some of the great scientists, the Renaissance, incredible people who struck forward for truth. And we've got here because we sort of understand the world better, or at least have called the truth more. And we are the beneficiaries of that. But we must be able to look around and go, we are really lucky. And I think the danger is we convince ourselves we deserve it, right? That somehow what we do means that, I'm not giving up, I've earned everything I've got. Therefore, it's the sort of the importance of the individual in the sense of, the rights to property. So we have these sort of ideas and narrative in our mind, which is like why we can justify what we have. But the problem is that, I think you could think about civilization as like a tower. It's sort of like the analogy I've come to, which is that we are building levels all the time, okay? And we didn't start with an organization structure. We didn't start with deep-rooted foundations that were made of concrete and, reinforced steel down, 100 meters. We weren't building a tower that was being, readied for this, to touch the gods, as it were. We were making up as we go along, right? We are a dynamic and random, evolutionary system. It's just, a product of our environments and also the situations we find ourselves in. Our language could sound completely different if just a few different people made a few different noises at at a certain point in time, and that became the way we went. Okay, so it's ridiculously amazing how we've got here, but it's not built with logic and truth. It's perversions of it. And so far, we've managed to navigate ourselves here to this extent that we have incredible knowledge. But at the same time, fundamentally, we've never sorted the foundations. It's still built on sand. We still have no universal truth. So, the founding fathers wrote, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Now, they were fed up with the British, rightly so, no taxation without representation. And then here is this land. And so freedom as a concept, basically, let's set some minimums, right? We never want to be subject to be subjected to an authority that denies us fundamental rights. So the concept of a minimum is established, and that has allowed it to flourish as a country. And there's many things wrong with America, but it is by and far a remarkable place where you can speak, right, freely. And they have more debate in America than we do than anywhere else. Maybe not on mainstream media stuff, but in circles, you can really see that there's a back and forth, and some people are still willing to engage, and meet the other side. Not as much, but we're still there. We still got hope. And so, here we had America setting out this amazing framework. Not perfect, as we know. There were some that were not, that were not seen as equal, right? Which is a stain upon its history. But equally, we don't have the same around the world. We all have these versions of our truth, how our country should work, our fundamental rights. But the reality is, unless your rights are the rights of others, they don't exist. They are only useful in the sense that you can enforce them. And we see time and again that we will eventually come to blows because we don't have these universal and shared truths. Therefore, when we get to a situation where, it's Russia and America, or whatever, or China, we have different versions of how we think it should be. And therefore, if we can't come together and make an agreement, which is very hard without a truth that we share, we're bound to come to conflict. And the self-interested nature, which is the only universal truth that humanity shares, that it's self-interested, is the engine of why we'll always face collapse unless we do something. Because from that self-interested nature, we tell ourselves whatever we want to justify our actions, right? And that, history is written by the victors. There are times in our history we have done great things. So, the British standing up, to Hitler alone, that was a remarkable thing, huge sacrifice, incredible. But we've done terrible things, right? And each in their own way, we thought we were right. And that's the problem. Everyone sees the world slightly differently. And we must recognize that. And we cannot allow ourselves to basically fail to find a universal truth. And then the question becomes, what is the universal truth? So if we were coming down looking at Earth today, let's imagine we didn't have any of the infrastructure, right? But there's 8 billion of us and we're in our loincloth, right? Garden of Eden stuff. But we had all the knowledge that we have. Then there is just blindingly obvious realities that we must accept. We all want more, right? No one's going to turn down free anything. So, we have no limit to our consumption desires. The thing that we have to face is that there's only so much stuff we can make, right? We have finite resources. We cannot in perpetuity grow. It can't happen, right? Unless someone has a matter machine, it cannot happen. And there'll be those that say we can recycle, okay? But it's not the case. So if we think of the world then as we have finite resources, everyone's there, how would we organize ourselves? Well, let's imagine we had free power, because that's an interesting concept that we'll come back to. But let's imagine there was free energy. Energy is the cost to do anything. Energy is, the surplus from the food supply was what enabled us to start having time to think, right? So when we made developments in agriculture, surplus food provided, we now release labor. So we had time to observe our world, and that began the flourishing of, knowledge and understanding. And that's been our journey since. It's not money that adds value to anything. It is our increasing knowledge of the world, and a surplus of energy, right? We have to make more energy to create more things, right? And that value, the size of the cake, is what we share. And, so when people think of, the economic system, they tend to think of wealth as the important thing. It's not really. It's your access to energy and your sort of share of it. And you can see that in terms of people have TVs or can travel today abroad. Right? It's relatively cheap. So that's fine. But the other parts are really, quite expensive. So, but you're still getting a net bigger share of energy. And if you look at the world, it's just going up and up and up. But the problem is, it's not. You can't make it last. So if the energy was free and we had finite resources, then the problem we would face, because a lot of people seem to think that cheaper energy bills solve the problem, but it doesn't. We would face an access problem. 8 billion people all over the world, in the countries that they are today, we don't have all the resources shared. So then it would be a case of how do we divide that up fairly? Right? If we knew everything we know today and started afresh. And the reality is, the system would have to be something completely different to keep order, because the implication is, for someone to have more, you'd have to take from another. Right? And this is we're into toddler levels of what our understanding of justice is and fairness. We would know, there is only so much, and we're taking more of it, which by implication means someone has less. And that is the stark reality that we really face. And we've always faced. It's just that we didn't know it at the start. And we are accidents of history, and we've come this far, not choosing to face it. And it's really important, because I don't think if we'd understood the world or sought for this truth, we'd have made it. Because when people realize this is the game, the rules that they've got don't make sense. The concept of the capitalist or communist life, it doesn't matter which one. Both systems will fail for this reason. You can't grow your way out of scarcity. So we have to lean into the reality that is, we need to consume resource shares, allocations per person, equality, right? Not in what you can do with it, but in terms of what is, your fair share based on the knowledge that we extract. And then in the pursuit of knowledge, the bar is raised for everyone. So if we can find ways to make those resources go further, we raise our standard of living, right? And it's a collective thing. And by ensuring it's a share of the resources that's equal, we also don't waste our time, competing and going to war, because we share a universal truth that we live on one planet. It has finite resources, and we need to share it. And if we don't share it fairly, we're going to, we don't have a universal truth again. We're going to have winners and we're going to have losers.
So is this then what's causing a lot of the problems? Just to re-summarize there, I've had talk to people like Gail Twerberg, Steve St. Angelo, Art Berman, energy people, and I don't know the answer on this. There's people talk about peak oil. Then there's this whole climate agenda. I think in the group that we're in on Twitter, I forget the name.
The low consumption. Interim project.
Something like that, yeah. And the theory is that this whole climate narrative is really a mask for what you're describing, that this scarcity and collapsing energy system. And so they can't tell us this, and so they have to sort of sell us another narrative to get us to use less energy, because if we don't, things will collapse in a much more disorderly fashion. And then, like there are these wars now, wars for resources. Venezuela wants to go after Guyana. And other different what's happening in Ukraine. They talk about Israel wanting to take Gaza because of the canal they want to create and the gas fields off of Gaza. And so, just again, what would you say is the issue here? And then your thought on the climate narrative. What do you think it's more accurately really about?
So, I think we are self-interested. That is the truth, and it's we're self-interested, and that is the universal trait. And to make sense of the world, that's what you must understand, and also what that means for your own way you perceive the reality. So, if you are unable to admit that you don't, if you can't admit that there are things that happen, you let happen, that didn't make any sense, but because it helped your side or your, what you perceive as your best interest. If you know there are truths that make no sense, but you've gone along with it, and I'm going to call out everybody. The political systems of the world are a joke, right? It is theatre, right? It's morally bankrupt. They are one and the same thing. It's just total bullshit, constantly about everything. And you don't need to believe in a grand conspiracy to think about how this happens. Everyone's got a bias. It starts to lean into everything, and for the sake of look at America. Donald Trump's not perfect by any stretch, by any imagination, right? But you'd have to say at the same time, when he was in office, he faced accusations about his mental capacity, in terms of he's not fit for office, despite the fact that was democracy. He was voted in. He warned Europe about gas from Russia. He spoke about NATO needing to step up, which we now recognize with Russia. That was right as well. He didn't start a war. He was subject to what is still a bizarre state of affairs if you just think about it logically. The American intelligence services have literally the biggest budgets. They spy on everyone around the world, and yet you're meant to tell me it's possible to be elected as a candidate with Russian help, and they didn't, and they had the investigation begin after you took office, right? Right, that's like red flags, guys. Right, that makes no sense. That is totally impossible. So people won't call it. People will simply say collusion with Russia. It's just there. It's obvious. Even though, why would Putin wait till he left office to invade Ukraine then? It makes no sense. If you're a stooge, why didn't he do it when he was in office and, not face as much opposition? None of it makes sense, but it doesn't have to anymore because it's for a narrative. It's for my self-interest. And the same with Biden. This is supposedly the leader of the free world. And, he may be the most, the nicest guy ever. It doesn't matter. He won't even take a cognitive test, right? This isn't a job at McDonald's, right? He should want to take the test because he's got nothing to hide. The end. Move on, right? Silence your critics. Do the right thing. But we don't have it. So we are in this world where people refuse to see the truth and call it out. And then I think that's where you start to get into this. What do we see in the world? Like, how does it make sense? And have we told ourselves the truth? And I come to this conclusion that, like I said, they can't tell us, right? Because we cannot. To get us to the other side, you have to have some measure of control. Because you're gonna have to force this on people. Because in the absence, you told them the truth. Okay, so let's say the powers to be came together and tried to tell people this is the reality. finite resources, so many of us, perpetual economic growth can't happen, and we need to, we're going to have to share. Everyone in the West who enjoys this, great lifestyle is going to say, even the people in the low ebbs, compared to other people, dramatically wealthy, are going to say, oh, no, fuck off, right? And there will be, in the systems of democracy, basically a candidate only too happy to come forward and tell you he can solve it, right? Or she can solve it. Because that's our way. Snake oil is just like a time-old tradition. It's never gone away. It's there because a fool and his money are easily parted, and that's the things. Everyone thinks that the game is stable, as it were. Like it can't completely fall over, so I'm okay to cheat. It really isn't, and that's the lesson. So I think you get to the stage where they have to tell you noble lies, give you the narratives, okay, construct the theatre to get you there, and then that's when and I'll step you through it. But like when you think about the systems of the world, they make no sense. So let's take Venezuela. Here was a country full of oil, and it began selling it. Okay, and it was, remarkably successful. He was like, I want the resources of this nation to finally, deliver for the people. And it is undeniable. He was doing it. Education programs, they were raising the bar, food plentiful, all of this stuff. And then when I got into digging into it, and I found like old documents, basically, I found the old PDVSA, which is the state oil company. I found a relic website that wasn't official, like in the sense of like it was no longer the face, but it was still on the internet, right? It hadn't been taken down, and I still got the papers. And the curious thing is that the narrative globally was really clear. American sanctions. America was the bad guy, messing around in South America again. But the strangest thing is that America had a joint venture with Venezuela, Citgo, right, a refining capacity in I think it's Florida. Or certainly southern coast of the US. Anyway, and a prize asset of Venezuela, right? The refining capacity is really important. And America had been going through the shale oil boom, stuff like that. And what you realize is that, firstly, it wasn't in America's interest that this oil was hitting the market, and it wasn't in Saudi Arabia or OPEC's interest, because people don't understand like the energy world and the price of it. We think the price of oil is set by a market. That market is effectively a racket. Okay, like it's controlled, and it gives you the appearance that it's controlled by competing forces, but it's really not. It's just big boys who've sewn it up, and with some justification that people are going to find perverse, but it's logical, which is that Venezuelan oil is really cheap to get out of the ground. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It's like, the original Saudi fields and stuff, it's right at the surface. Therefore, they can produce it really cheaply. They don't actually have to put that much energy in to get it out. So that's a term that I come to learn, so the energy return on investment. So their oil is basically all net profit. So they can flood the system, and the shale oil operators, right, the price would fall, right, and the shale oil suppliers and some Saudi fields, things like that, they would become uneconomical. Now, that's a problem for a system of the global economic system that, let's remember, the purpose is to keep order, right? We have to be able to keep everybody on the planet in a lane, right, and not get ahead of themselves and start thinking this is unjust and fair, and we lose the social, the order. So when we think about these places with resources, it's not inherently a good thing for the system of the world that they do their thing, because it will jeopardize the investment profiles that are already well established, right, that are providing a supply of oil that we need. And the danger would be is that the supply would, hit the market, price would drop, and then we'd find ourselves coming to energy cliffs, because we didn't coordinate the oil extraction from the day one globally. We've been taking from different fields, selling it at one price, but that's not the price of the actual oil. So we get dysfunction, and then we'd end up with these supply bumps, and the supply bumps would destroy economies. So when people in the news were saying, "Well, it's America," they've got it's like, well, is it? And then you start to see something else, which is, you know, when America stepped forward and came to sort of appear like it was interfering, Russia turned up and said, "Oh, America, we'll sell you loads of military stuff, weapons, and defense, right?" And Venezuela at the time was full of cash, rolling in it. And the Russians like, don't pay us in cash. Don't pay us in cash. Pay us in credit. Somebody will lend you the money. And this is like the economic hitman piece. The Russians lent the money, sent the arms, and then between the sort of the apparent contest, okay, the oil price, I think if you remember, it collapsed, and basically Venezuela found itself in a tricky position. It couldn't afford its credit card bills that it had now with Russia, and there's a number of things. The state oil company was, the bonds it was issuing and the prices it was issuing are just mental. They're just weird. And those are going through American banks. And it, for all intents and purposes, then he had to start cutting from his social programs to pay Russia. All right. The global oil price had collapsed, and now they were underwater. And Russia had, with Gazprom, they basically set up all these joint ventures with small minority states, right? It looks like it's just them helping them develop their oil. But it's not, because they're all with terms to creep. So they all have the option, which is they fail to repay, we take more of your share. And so basically, what was an independent nation with the opportunity to sell its natural resources has, and here's, I won't make the allegation because it will blow people's minds, but to the inadvertent action of two powers, let's say acting in their own self-interest, potentially not, they worked it so that the country fell into, basically a trap that left its country starving, with them having to pay every cent they can earn from their oil industry, not to invest in it and grow it, to basically keep the lights on, just about. And even now, with Maduro, the people buying his debt are the BlackRocks and Goldman Sachs. They're sustaining this power of this so-called, dictator. But it seems apparent that, Venezuela wasn't meant to succeed. And it's like, why was that? And then that takes you into this, what's going on in the energy market? And that's why,
just a question there. So there just seems like an apparent contradiction, but I guess it can be explained where you say previously that you look at other oil fields, shale, Gulf, that they're digging deeper. The return on energy investment is much less. So in general, would you say across the board, the return is less on energy, but in a place like Venezuela is more like an exception or an anomaly where they have easier access, but the system as a whole is running dry?
Yeah, so the world's economy runs on energy, and the biggest contributor to it is either natural gas or oil. And oil is slightly, vital because it has, more vital because it does more things, right? So we have plastics from it, right? It has a much bigger role. Like, when there's a group called Just Stop Fossil Fuels, right? And there's a bane in my life, which is like, it's all well and good you saying that. What happens after? Right? Are we aware of the sheer amount of everything that these things deliver? Because in the absence of an alternative, you're basically signing us up for, mass death, right? Like you're right in the sense that not for the climate reason, but for the fact that we're going to run out of it, right? Eventually, we have to just stop fossil fuels. But like the reasoning and the rationale is nonsense. You would tip us into this chaos where suddenly 8 billion people are all on the pitch and they no longer have a system that they know can provide for them. So suddenly we're going to stop cooperating. We're going to start fighting. And that's how an environment changes as well. The tools that we have at play, nuclear weapons to date are not used because it makes no sense for anyone to use it. There wouldn't be a world left having. Okay. However, if you're in a world where nationalist rulers start taking control because they say they can sort out the problems, right? But they can't, because basically the system as it is today with peak globalization is supporting as many people as it can, and we're running out of energy, right? It's getting more expensive, so more going to lose. Well, eventually, someone's going to see a nuclear weapon as a why the fuck not, right? It becomes because you're screwed either way. So they're going to become tools to try because you've got nothing left. And if you don't, you'll just be thrown out of office, and someone will eventually, muster the stupidity to do it, right? And we don't want to get there. So when people say just stop fossil fuels, be aware of where you're tipping. And the world oil price fundamentally drives the cost of everything. And this is the problem we have. We basically have a supply of something that is not all of the same price, but we need to ensure the supply. So in effect, you do need to manage price. It's really important. And there's subsidies to fossil fuel companies. People are like, oh, why do you do that? There's actually a reason, which is that they need to be made good with certainty to basically develop the future fields, to keep going with the technology we're going to need to keep extracting, as we get into the Arctic and other places, right? So we have this sort of, the price of today is not factoring in what the price needs to be to keep the supply coming on stream. But at the same time, if we made the price reflect that, we crash the global economy. So that's a problem. And this is where, this is where it's interesting how things then start to align, because, then the monetary system is an interesting concept, and like, what's it there to do? And the oil crisis and the transition away from Bretton Woods and into fiat currency, at the same time as opening up China and so these are some interesting things. But fundamentally, fiat currencies have allowed, with the dollar as the reserve in the petrodollar, it's basically allowing us to hide the rising real cost of energy. Because we're not making more stuff. Our efficiencies are not there. And you can see this if you look at, so the point being is this net cost of energy, right? We're actually, every barrel of oil we extract, there's less energy in it that is actually profit, right? So the more we consume, the more we have to dig up, and it just, to get the same amount back, and it's just, it's a cliff. And so that's happening. And you can spot this is happening with the fact that for the last 2 decades, the oil price is basically a long-term trend up, and you're seeing it reflect in the price of food. So we're at peak globalization, we have all this technology, but at the end of the day, we now have the base unit of our economy is becoming more scarce. And we've got nowhere to go. So fiat currencies are useful. That would then start showing up, right, in the fact that economic growth will start falling. And I think this is what explains the productivity flatline for those 2 decades that we've seen across the West, where real wages aren't rising, because you're not more productive anymore. The scarcity built in by energy is basically eroding any productivity gains. This is why we see the anemic, anemic economic growth, and yet every country is running a deficit. And so, the creation of independent central banks appears to have been basically wrestling away from the tyranny of the masses, the political control of the monetary supply. And they are geared and have coordinated effectively an illusion of growth. So they are, when we had the crisis in 2008, is basically, again, maybe it was an accident. I suspect it isn't. I think they needed a crisis to basically hide this problem, right? We have reached the limits of growth. We are going to all get poorer, okay? And there's no way to stop it, right? Based on the model, okay? And that had to be kept on going. So when 2008, we had, supposedly mortgage debt in the States, ninja loans, basically packaged up, right, and graded wrong. Okay. All right. I have a new rule, which basically says if Hollywood made a film about it, there's a narrative they need you to believe. right? Right? Because, you know, because the answer to it was to basically facilitate more borrowing, right? This is the stupid thing. Like, we basically came out of a crisis that was to do with an inability to keep expanding the credit system, right? We were no longer generating sufficient income to the bottom levels of society to allow them to grow more. Okay, so they tried doing a few things within the tools that they had, which were to basically engineer rising house prices to give some wealth effect. So people around the world who are going, why do houses cost so much? By design, okay? Because in a fractional reserve banking system, as you inflate the value of the asset base in the economy, banks can lend, right? Because in theory, there's more wealth. It's nonsense. It's rigging the game to keep creating an asset base that you can then lend off. So I think they were running out of steam, and you can sort of see that in how quickly they came together in the financial crisis to solve the problem. It's amazing how quick solutions to complex problems arise. That's sort of a giveaway that this isn't necessarily as innocent or maybe as random as you would think, because Christ, we can barely agree on anything, but yet when the moment comes, here are these tools deployed, and then we had this. We just had 10 years of basically free money. The answer to the problem of too much debt was more debt.
Is it like a system where if they didn't do otherwise, we would have completely collapsed back then, and so they just have to keep
they have to
this fraud going?
They have to. Well, it's not the bankers, right? In a sense, right? It's a delusion we're all telling ourselves. Okay, the wealth effect that we're seeing of house prices going up are largely a trick, which is that they've facilitated more bank lending. So it facilitates bank lending by QE, and like the volumes of QE, people just didn't blink. QE was meant to be an emergency measure, okay, and it was introduced, and everyone did a bit of it, and then over the next decade, you just watch these rounds of QE that grew and grew and grew, and it's like everyone just goes, yeah, well, everyone's doing it, so it must be okay, and all of it is trying to do is just create a wealth effect so that banks can lend more. So, and that keeps the money rolling through the system, right? So and over time, you're going to lose that value of, your currencies are being debased because there's just more and more money being made, right? And you look at the value of the dollar or any currency, right? That's what fiats are doing. They are perpetually falling in value, but almost together. And they're masking this resource problem. And, it digs deeper when you've got governments are stepping forward now with, not only is the QE, but then they're also borrowing. They're increasing their own debt and monetizing it, and why you get the inflation. And that, is basically fiscal dominance now. We're in a world where the monetary policy has to follow the fiscal positions. And that's what, you look at America, it's not just because it's the reserve currency, it's just there's nowhere to go, folks. If we wanted to get off, deficits are running at, between 5 and 10%. They have been for years, right? And we're only getting 2% economic growth. Right? We are in an inescapable trap.
I might be jumping ahead, but then I want to get your thoughts on some of these ideas that are being floated out there by the technocrats, or we all hear the Great Reset stuff, which seems to be neo-feudal technocratic aspects, where they're pushing we all need to have digital IDs. They want CBDCs. They talk about these sort of smart, resilient cities, 15-minute cities. Trying to wean us off of our cars. They're building bike lanes, public transports. What do you make of some of these policies that governments are implementing? They're getting rid of gas-powered vehicles completely. I just read yesterday, New Zealand says by 2040 they want to basically ban the import of internal combustion engines. And so, what do you make of these ideas that governments are throwing out there?
So we're being lied to. Now, anybody can find this out, right? That's absolutely clear. So let's not even pretend or sugarcoat it. We're being lied to. But we're allowing the lying to happen, right? Because we're back to this age where one thing that drives me wild in London and the West is holidays. Like, you have people going on social media who are just desperate to show how wonderfully knowledgeable they are and how virtuous they are in their support of Earth Day, and they'll turn their lights on and whatever, and they'll tell you about how they only buy whatever the most sustainable whatever, and then they're doing like 5 holidays a year. Right? Just jumping on planes for weekend breaks. And it's these sort of just the dissonance, the contradiction in terms of where they are. And then the failure to challenge there's an easy way to find out if they're lying. Ask for some evidence. Okay, so, the green jobs revolution. We're still waiting. Right? We are not seeing it. Apparently, renewable energy is the solution, and it's cheaper. Henry Ford didn't need subsidies to replace horses, right? The product spoke for itself, right? You do not need to persuade people to save money. Right? It will happen. So it's not happening, is it? Our energy bills are going up, right? And at the same time, the renewable base is, the cost, resetting the grid, we're duplicating the entire energy grid, right? So we had an energy grid that worked, but it produced carbon, right? That they tell you is causing is causing climate change. Every prediction they make is wrong. Now, I agree that there's ecosystem destruction. We are abusing the natural world, no doubt. Do I believe that climate change is real? No. Because you only have to look at the world and what's happening. So the West is basically committing economic suicide. I saw today Germany basically is the engine of the EU. It's the borrowing capacity that's funded the EU. And they all trade with each other. So if you're in the same ship, guys, you're going to sink quicker because you just don't have, it's a business with one revenue stream. It doesn't have any diversification. So they're screwed. The EU is a terrible model. But anyway, people tell you it's fantastic. It basically, the Germans have shut down the nuclear plants. Right, they were building a gas pipe with Russia, who is also, they knew, for the last 10 years, he's been on the naughty step, right? He shouldn't be trusted, is what we're told. But yeah, they were still building pipelines, right? So their politicians have conspired to place their economy, the well-being of their citizens, at total risk, right? And the EU, at the start of the war, they should give the game away, folks, but at the start of the war, when the EU sanctioned Russian gas, it's almost a question of, is this a real war? Because if you're dependent for 20% of your energy or 30% of your energy on your enemy, and you think by sanctioning your enemy, you're going to win, you are not. So what have they got out of that? Well, prices shot up because basically, you've just said, we won't buy from you. You can't find 30% of your energy supply overnight. The system of the world doesn't work like that. It takes time to bring things on stream. So we saw that record price, okay, and huge spike in energy bills. And obviously, the only way you can solve the gap is by still buying Russian energy, because it's the only source that can fill the gap and not cause economic collapse. So the Russian energy gets rebadged and sold back to us. So we're buying the same energy at a higher price, and we've only made ourselves weaker. So this isn't 4D chess, right? They don't even understand the world that they're supposedly in charge of, right? Or they're doing it deliberately. And and just the naivety of this and the failure of the media to even talk about it, right? Either the journalistic class of the West, right? Either they are all compromised, right? Or totally cannot and shouldn't be in their jobs, right? But the other scary thing is the narratives they come up with are nonsense. It just doesn't make sense. So Germany's going to deindustrialize, and then its borrowing capacity is going to fall. Then you're into this world of, we've already seen in the UK, we've got an election coming up, and there is no money. There is no money because no one's going to lend it to us. And the only way you can get out of that is to print more of your own. But that just means your currency becomes less and less valuable. And crucially, for many parts of the West, and particularly Europe, they don't make anything. we have through the process of globalization, we've exported the things of real value out to the rest of the world. We can do it cheaper, and largely our economies are service and consumption fueled. But the consumption sort of rested on our monetary system keeping our position in terms of the dominance. So, like, we could dictate the flow of value. Now we're going to lose it because we just don't have anything that's real anymore. Germany will have nothing to show for itself. And the funny thing as well is, like, even the response of the energy crisis is strange in terms of, it's like they want to drain the public purse and end up with nothing, because the immediate response of governments, again, quite bizarrely, was just to say, right, we're going to pay for this. We're going to give, in some way, shape, or form, we're going to subsidize the cost of this spike. And companies in Germany were like, okay, yeah. But then they're still making things, right? And that would be uneconomical. So the government's basically now paying for output, right? And that will keep wages flowing, right? But there's still cars that if they try to sell it at the real price of the cost of making it, they would now be vastly more expensive. And then Nord Stream 2, which, again, apparently, just like COVID, nobody wants to find out the truth. Right? Again, another glaringly obvious thing. You cannot allow these things to sit, right? We must know what happened. In the absence of knowing what happened, you should trust no one. Because the significance of that pipeline is that it basically renders the possibility of a European, a price of energy in Europe coming back on stream, right, as very unlikely. Basically means that there's no real supply routes to get cheap energy into Europe. So that raises the long-term price expectations of business. And so what you're now seeing is there are businesses shutting. They've taken the subsidies, right? They've taken the subsidies, and they're still going to move their factories. So they threw good money after nothing, because at the end of the day, unless there was a plan to solve for the long-term price of energy and bring it back down to where it was, the companies are going to move. Trade would.
So why are they doing this? It's, when I hear this money that's constantly being thrown at Ukraine, and I feel like it's just completely being wasted. It's like it's almost, my gut reaction is it's like they're intentionally draining the treasuries of America and Europe intentionally, whatever's left, like to collapse us intentionally, or they're just incompetent or both. Why is the West doing this?
Well, this is the $1 million question, and I think it is the $1 million question. And I think if people are honest with themselves, they know the world makes no sense right now. Okay, they just know it. Like, every decision is put down to incompetence. Same with COVID, right? But no one's asking questions. But the decisions are so obvious and contradictory and make no sense and come with so little detail, right? And invariably go against you, that I'm convinced there is a process we're having to go through. And this is, my journey into, thinking about how things interact and complexity and the nature of humanity itself, takes you into psychology and back to this point around self-interest, which is that you cannot. Everyone's seen the film Inception, and Christopher Nolan's films are an interesting narrative arc. If you want to go through his film, he's not picking random films, I don't believe. They are all very interesting points. And the Batman trilogy is, a remarkable one, because it talks about many of the problems we see in our society, which is that, the Joker, side of Christopher Nolan, but effectively our self-interest means that we'll tell ourselves a story. Okay, and like I said before, we'll keep finding a way to deny reality. Denial is the most predictable of human, behaviors, and we only have to look at the number of stories that have come and gone in our past, and the things that we've done that we tell ourselves are okay, to see how how much we will contort our reality to try and keep with what we would like to be true. And we, as a civilization, I think what happened was I think after the First World War, it was already starting to come to pass, which is that there was awareness of the world where we are, we are one people, and we are destined, Europe, close proximity of so many different cultures, all wanting to grow and expand, but you can't because you come against another force. And if you can't create the cooperation, you end up fighting. And this is sort of inherently true, and we know it of history. And by circumstance, it happened to be that post the Second World War, we found ourselves in a slightly, we were slightly lucky. It would sound bizarre to say this, but we had two dominant powers, which is really useful for the advent of the problem we faced, because America sort of pursued relentlessly, to out-succeed communism. And, the defeat, the end of the Soviet Union was vital to this next step, whereby we now had a world where, China was being brought in by America. Clearly there's a deal there, right? America's not building China up to be a threat. They're one and the same thing, right? They are now linked. This idea of China as a competitor, it isn't. No one can win, guys. Like, you cannot take now. The world will never be better off than it is today. We're in a world of there's only going to be big losers from any winners. And that drives the dysfunction and the chaos that we don't want, because we need the order. But what we had to try and get to was we need a way to control for this human nature. We need the technology. Okay. And that's where we start to get into this digital world. And I think, and I've come to this, theory. It's like, why is it so obvious, right? Why do we find ourselves with, I don't know if you've ever read Robert Greene's, really great book, The 48 Laws of Power. But, power doesn't tell you what it's doing, right? Real power is completely hidden, okay? It does. I mean, a good way to know this, we talk about like the world's richest people, okay? But if you look at a national country, like how much of the wealth does the top 1% have, okay? And then if you apply the same concepts and the distribution of income and wealth to the global economy, then there's somebody a heck of a lot more rich than Elon Musk, right? They're trillionaires, right? They exist, right? Or certainly families. And by the way, this isn't going to the conspiracy, by the way, of the Rothschilds and all this evil, because I'm going to try and explain why people, again, don't understand the world they live in and the responsibilities of power, right? It's very easy for people to say they have so much, right? And they live this extravagant lifestyle. But here's the sort of reality. They can use that power to do lots of things that they want to do, but they don't. The amount of spend, they have to spend money because it helps create jobs, okay? But by holding on to that amount of concentration of wealth, okay, it keeps the system going. Because if we could, which you can't, people understand wealth is an illusory concept, okay? Who can buy, if you said tax the richest 10%, who's going to buy their stuff? Right, the value of it inherently is less anyway, because you're basically saying we'll take money off the top of society, so you're going to stop generating as much. People are not going to bother trying. So, but even if you could, and we distribute that amongst everybody on the planet, right? We'll give it to the poorest. Let's Robin Hood. All those people would do is consume. But we have a problem in the consumption system, which is that it's scarcity is becoming a dominant thing. So the price would go up. So in giving money to everybody, we would just be as poor, all right? But it would create new powers, okay? And this is the interesting concept. Those people have power, and they're not using it for that much, okay? However much you want to believe the conspiracy, right? Their power has 8 billion people on this planet, okay? Under communism, that's not how it goes, right? There are billions of people alive now that maybe wouldn't have been if it wasn't for the fact that America and the power that resides within it and how this system works has basically not gone out of its way to kill people. It's trying to keep 8 billion people in a system that can work, right? That keeps coherence because if it breaks, it's just chaos. And so we can't take from these people and make our lives better. It's a fool's errand. And the left of politics are shameless in the way that they maybe they're doing it deliberately, but how are they not comprehending this? Okay, right? We'd be far better off teaching people, to learn, and also to become more content, right? To not feel, not encourage envy, but it's the opposite of what the system does. It tells people to get angry, and that's why we see this increasing polarization. Because I think people are starting to realize that this system doesn't seem to be working for me. So we're reaching sort of limits in our sense of how much we can cope, but they've got us here, and there was it was basically a banking crisis at the end of 2019. Like, we were about to go into another crash, right? So it was damn good timing for COVID to come along. Most people won't know it, but we were seeing the signs of another great financial crisis. And so COVID came, and then alongside of it, you've got, like you said, you've got climate change, which is completely incoherent in that we keep seeing all this data, right? And you can see it on your weather. Weather used to be, just a normal thing. You got the forecast. Now it's just red. They might as well just put a skull and crossbones on it and, have done. And you've got, the Western world basically making its own people poorer at the same time as China is just, and India, vast expansion in their CO2 output. Okay, so like as a globe, we're not stopping. If you actually look at the consumption of fossil fuels over the last 30 years, it's going up, right? So like there is no way that the climate narrative is real, but what it's allowed and facilitated, because people in the West just will not question, they want to be seen as right rather than be right, they go along with shit because they don't really embarrass themselves by challenging and asking for evidence. Right, because you get these, normally on the left, but like the people that just think that life is easy and everyone could just live in this blissful harmony. It's just not true, and they scream at you as if you're moral. COVID's a great example. I argued against lockdowns, and you're called basically the most selfish person on the planet. Right, those people have no reflection on the fact, like I said, the lockdown chaos and the pain they now suffer. What do? They blame the government. Right. Every country around the world is facing the same problems, but they think it's unique to them, and they're going to blame the party in power. Every political system failed to provide the alternative argument. Both sides of the aisle, messed up. So climate change is nonsense to help control energy and reduce the growth, right? To literally reduce the consumption. And I think that's where you could take it into why were the CIA so involved with drugs? I think drugs and the illegal trade in drugs is a deliberate design to drain consumption potential out of Western countries, right? It keeps the poor, right? They are full of agency in themselves, right? People make their own choices. So, it's not like they're taken to the streets and forced to take drugs. And we have to reflect on that. People have individual responsibility. But the trade, I believe, like there's CIA in rap music as well, like, to foment basically bad role models. Again, to deny and keep low groups of society that if they weren't in such a disarray, the discontent with the system would be more obvious, because they'd be like, hang on, I've gone to school, I'm doing the right thing, and I'm still fucked. And you're seeing that now, actually, in America, where you've got, the university and the college education, just a total perversion of fact. You've got, we are loading in so much debt simply to keep it going, and telling these kids that, you're going to earn more money. Well, no, you're not, right? And, by the way, you're not going to be able to afford a house. Like, or the life that your parents have lived, it's not possible. We won't tell you that. We're just going to saddle you with debt until maybe eventually you'll realize, but then it's too late. And when they mention all these digital systems, then with, vaccine passports, or, carbon footprints, basically the digital invasion, I think that they're doing something else. And again, power should conceal itself. And this is just so in your face and so obvious that, I've said it before, but maybe they want a revolution, right? You can't persuade people to change, okay? See, you have to destroy their faith in the system. You have to do a controlled demolition of the ideas and the stories that are just so ingrained in their head. And back to the inception, an idea is more persistent. You can't, viruses our body can clear. Ideas we cannot. Look at religion. We cannot get ourselves out of it. We're just in too much denial, and they are going to break it. Okay? And the things that I see happening in terms of the digital threats, even the trans movement, is another aspect of this. They are pushing your buttons to make you realize what's important. Okay? They're trying to provoke, in my mind, they're taking us through, and only some of us are going to make it. I'll maybe say that for later, but, they're trying to provoke the best of us. Okay? We know we've got to get to a world where we can share. They are appearing like an elite that are soaking up power. It's all right for them. They're so in your face about that, and then lecturing us. The hypocrisy is so obvious that if you were going to revolt, what world would you ask for, right? And that's what I think they're planting as we move through. However long it's going to take. It could frankly happen next year, this year. It's happening, right? And we're going to come to this moment where it just doesn't work, right? And lockdowns are going to be useful for conditioning as well. So I think we're going to have some form of financial lockdown, right? They'll say, no, it doesn't work. We're fucked. We're going to have to sit this one out. Summer in the Northern Hemisphere is typically a time to do it because 90% of people live in the Northern Hemisphere, right? So summers are more pleasant. So this is normally when lots of stuff happens. It's quite interesting. If your history, you'll see it. But so I think they're provoking the response in us. They're trying to find out who understands, who are the best of society, who are the people that will stand up and say no, right? Who will create this new world? Who will be the leaders of it? And, there's so many concepts that people, we don't like this idea of losing out, okay? We don't, right? Self-interest. But privacy is a really interesting concept. So we know that people cheat. Self-interest, right? We're not calling for truth. We're happy to buy bullshit, even though we know it's bullshit. So we're all on board with this, right? In every, unless you're prepared to really stand up, who will be that guy in Tiananmen Square? No one is the answer, right? I'm risking today being called a fool because this is controversial stuff. But I'm prepared to put my neck on the line because I think I wouldn't be able to live in my conscience if I didn't. But take privacy. In history, we had like feudalistic systems whereby there was one single authority that had power over people, and effectively the loss of, the lack of individual rights and privacy meant that you had the secret bleed, right? Everyone could see anything. Now, the reason that exists is because the power is stopping other plots, right? Because the system can't sustain itself, so the privacy is necessary to create some balance in the power structure. And that was basically, that is the motive behind privacy. But what people don't understand is that it's now become your enemy, right? The ability, what's happening right now is able to happen because there is a world that we do not see. It is closed doors, secret email systems. It is assets within intelligence agencies around the world that are working for somebody else, okay? And they're playing this adversarial model against everybody, and it's able to function and move itself around using privacy as its cover. So a good example of how the monetary system nonsense, in the Patriot Act after 9/11, huge invasion of privacy, Americans gave up fundamental rights with no accountability to power that was asking to have it. So there was no public, like random juries, to sit on the, who was accessing what, right? The public should see that. We should have random juries, right? Because it's essential for some level of oversight to stop abuse. And the one thing they didn't change was like, you don't get to find out who owns private companies in America, right? The corporate entity, the tax havens, right? There's a reason these things exist. Charitable foundations, okay? Sound interesting, sound lovely, right? They are not what you think they are. They are a very convenient way to move resources towards ends outside of government oversight. And in a way that doesn't contradict capitalism. So if Google started doing loads of stuff that shareholders are like, well, this doesn't make any sense, well, you do this. Stop doing that. We're about profit, right? So they can't fund all of these things within the private sphere. So they have to use NGOs as fronts to do it. And why does Bill Gates want to fund tea and coffee mornings with every single political player in all across the West? Why is he so you don't need to do that, right? And why are all these NGOs funded by him? Well, it's pretty obvious. Effectively, we have the illusion of democracy, which is that the only people that get to power are the ones that are picked, right? Because that's what money dictates. So it doesn't matter who wins either side, right? Like there is no genuine candidate in elections. They're both playing the same side. And then, the NGOs are the policy experts, okay? But they're not experts, right? They have an answer they seek, right? And they're not going to tell you. They just dress it up, right? That's why climate scientists will stand there and say the world's going to end, right? But they haven't done the other part of the equation because they're not an economist. So you have this like compartmentalized knowledge that no one's trying to connect the dots, and it's just foolishness. But the NGOs provide the cover. The international bodies like the IMF and the World Bank that are elevated by the media as independent and like, whatever, again, serve a different master, right? They're there to wrestle the risk of breakdown in order, right? They're there as like these unofficial forms of police to keep us, going in one direction. And at the same time, let's keep pretending there's democracy, right? And you can operate with, you still do lots of things, but like I said before, the parameters are set, the pitch is defined, right? And you didn't get to say, you didn't get a choice. And we're just heading that way. And, I'm convinced they're trying to provoke the best of us. So privacy would now demand, we are on the brink of unimaginable technological advancement in form of AI. Okay, the ability to do complex calculations and discover knowledge on a scale of never seen. Okay, and first of all, knowledge is power, not money, right? You can use knowledge to make money, and concentrations of knowledge are very dangerous because truth is what matters. So we are heading to a world where knowledge is going to quickly be discovered, and the majority of people will have no way if it's been shared in a fair way. So we need to understand. And by the way, that knowledge and the technological advances will make threats to our system inexorably higher. Okay, so frustrated souls. The last James Bond film was quite interesting. People are like, why did the guy want to do it? Basically, but that Joker, people do this stuff eventually because they're done with it, right? They see a world that doesn't care for them, right? That ignores them. They're trapped, and eventually, someone's going to get access to technology that you can't protect against, because you can't protect against everything in a world of privacy. We need to know that if we're having a system where we're going to share everything, we need to know that our plots of people trying to cheat others. So if the trick isn't that we need privacy, the only reason you need privacy is if one power exists that is unaccountable. The actual system of the future should be a form of a totally transparent blockchain. Okay?
Do you think this is where they're taking us? Because in general, I just see the trend is what you're talking about: blockchains, digital currencies, metaverse, VR, AR, AI, I guess two questions there. Are we? It seems like we're going into this sort of digital online system. Are we? And are they trying to steer us in that direction, or are you just saying that this is what you think is also a good idea?
Well, I mean, we have to look, right? So there are a couple of companies now that are racing to this technology. Okay, that we're told. I actually think, in part, it's maybe a bit of a front. Generally, technology only reveals itself like when it's made public. It's developed long before. There's the romantic story of the internet, and then there's the real story of the internet. Okay, and I think people have to face into the fact that I think what they're getting again is this sort of community theatre of like they're just introducing concepts to you now, and there's some rollout of it, and again like we have to understand that with great power comes great responsibility, and if you're going to have a decentralized system, okay, and empower the people, then actually you need to have a way to constrain the self-interested motive to stop authority forming, right? And it looks right now that they're abusing their power, right, left, right, and center, because they seem to be living hypocritical lives. They're seeking to take away fundamentals like fake news, misinformation, censorship, hate laws, right? This sort of this drift to authoritarianism. Well, it's a natural process. Capitalism or communism gets there the same way. The point is that to keep the system together, you basically have to create but more and more technical ways to do it, right? That stop it breaking out, because otherwise you're at risk of it falling over. So the totalitarian, tyrannical is not just engineered by fear, but everyone fears it and wants it. We are all inviting this into our lives. No one is saying, hang on, where does this go? And what I think, like I say, I personally think the best solution it would be a totally transparent digital world. Okay, so what do I mean by that? What it means is that you aren't like no one can see into your house. Okay, you don't need that level of stuff, but they can see what you buy, right? And they can see your messages. Okay, and people are like, well, that's now. Let me be clear. It does nothing to impact your freedom. Okay, because the rule of life should be there's loads of different ideas that people have, and they're not first. There's some for others, not for others, right? And it's like, but we're never going to agree on that, right? So it's not for us to say what people do in their private life, okay? But we have to make sure that no one's plotting or trying to cheat the system and form power bases. So basically, do whatever you want, but we need to make sure that, and everyone's on the same level, there's no power in this, right? And AI could become the final, the referee that we need, right? We will take the human out of the system of niche called it weakness creates weakness or corrupts weakness, but power corrupts absolutely. Right? We need to take the human out. We need to have a system whereby, for once and for the first time, we set minimums, fundamentals that can't be broken, right? Or you will be kicked out of the system, right? Or punished by the system. That's not. People talk like social credit. That every story of the past, the religions, the myths, the films we watch, they are intrinsically about warning us. And it may be because there was a civilization that came long before even the ones we think. And that's why they all had this not shared knowledge, the Egyptians, Mayans, they all seem to have knowledge of astrology and similar, symbols. Maybe there was a great time when a civilization made it far, just like we did. And that civilization fell. And the ruins of it, the disparate groups that survived and went into the new dark ages and formed their new places, those survivors told of a story. How would you try and warn people of the lesson you've learned? And the obvious one would be the original sin. Don't commit. Don't cheat somebody. Be fair. Be decent, right? Because if you'll think it's fine, but eventually there comes a catastrophe, right? Every story, religion, there's a rapture, there's a flood. The golden age of Saturn's really interesting. One of the really base sources of lots of religions. And Kronos, and eating our children. Maybe it's not that we're eating our children. It's a metaphor for what we're doing when we commit these original sins. We are basically destroying ourselves, right? One way or the other, the wheels will come off, and maybe that's the cautionary tale in all of it. So we have to come up with a perfect system that, imagine this world, AI, AI will allow for, essentially, we could set some minimums, like everybody should receive a food allowance every day. Okay, the food could be grown by the best. What is the perfect balanced diet for humans? Okay, now people don't think this sounds, slightly, I want choice, but let's just think about the upside for the first. We could have a food that's like, we know the answer. This is what we should eat every day. This is really what you need. Okay, and that's a minimum. We design, AI designs the system, and it's automated production. We don't need labor anymore, guys. Right? There is no, capitalism and communism are dead. They are done because we no longer need them.
Would you just name this music? Because what you're talking about reminds me somewhat of these experts that talk about existential risk, like Nick Bostrom. He's proposed systems like he calls it algocracy, rule by algorithm or AI. Sounds, I don't know if you've read him, but also I'm forgetting my second question here. But is it similar to algocracy?
Well, no, I mean, I think one of the great failures, I think, in like true wisdom is actually to know that we don't know everything, right? So we're still on a journey, but we know this journey is going to change materially. And that's why I think it's important to talk about minimums. Only when we set fundamental minimums in the system, red lines, do we therefore limit the actual maximums of the system can go. So, the ultimate sign of a civilization, and one that can flourish, and by flourish I mean allow people to do whatever, right? We have no idea where this could go because we've basically deployed the vast majority of our resources to finding ways to either kill ourselves or effectively do pointless jobs to pay for food and things that we tell ourselves make ourselves happy, but ultimately in the end won't. And so we need to think about this. Imagine a world where every single day, automated production of food in a recommended healthy diet, okay, that's everyone gets it, and shelter, okay? So you literally don't have to work anymore, okay? And you then, that is the sign of civilization, because you no longer have to work for someone. You can literally be free to do with your time whatever you want. So you've got that, you're going to have food tomorrow, you've got a place to sleep, and you therefore no longer need to do the shitty job. So knowing that, what would you put yourself to? Now, bearing in mind, you'd have access to digital books, you'd be able to, all this information, we could pump it into everyone's homes, full digital access to the wealth of knowledge of humankind, right? Culture would explode. Okay, we would find new things and ways to think about life, and we'd no longer sell our souls to survive. We'd seek things that bring meaning, and look, that will get so many people, right? So it's like that's going to take a certain amount of resources to do that. Okay, and then it's back to this question of what's the sustainable amount per person, okay, that the knowledge of the day allows. And there can be some form of quasi, not capitalism, but effectively, you can choose to spend your resource share of what's left over in however you want.
My question just came back to me. So, and I agree with you that basically communism and capitalism are irrelevant now. But what would you call this system? Is it then technocracy? Have you used that term?
Well, no, because it's interesting. Like we are so familiar with the idea that we need to have a destination, right? There has to be a shared destination, and that's what unites us. But it's not really the solution, because that's where you get these people that become they think they know better, and this is the one thing history screams at us. Like, it's not for me to say you should learn the guitar or you should, right? Like, if we have a world where nobody can fall below the minimum of shelter and food, okay, and therefore any actions, it's a bit like what America was meant to be about, right? In terms of the fundamental rights, you can do anything provided it doesn't infringe on the rights of others, okay? Now we just need to take it to the next level. We don't need to define. We don't need to define where the answers are. That's the joy. We literally just need to define how we interact with each other. Okay, and it will fundamentally revolutionize everything about us, because nobody would live in fear, right? That's a remarkable thing. We'd have to come up with some form of a genuine form of democracy, which is like we no longer have to worry about corruption. So, like, for example, we want to devote a certain amount of our resource base to research and development, potentially, right? Although that may not be as much in the future, because AI will get to answers quicker. We don't have to do as much trial and error. But there'll have to be some collective measure of where do we focus the hose pipe, okay, of like what's on surface. So we're still going to need to progress, because that's the other thing we sort of forgotten. We're going nowhere. We're going nowhere. We are. It's harder for people to stay alive. America's going back to the moon. Why? What does that offer, right? Oh, we're going to Mars. Why? What does that offer? Like, I know science is sometimes like, breaking out and, trying to find it, but at the moment we've got a bigger problem, right? Which is we don't have a way to live together. And most people's lives are, I sort of shouldn't say this, but more ridicule for me, but like, I'm single at the moment, and but like dating, I find perverse, because people have got these like Disney dreams in their head, right? And they just want a house, some kids, a dog, right? And I get why, right? But come on, like, we can do better. We can have those things, but like, what is the North Star? Like, Jake, what are we here for? I don't see it. So I think we have to be realistic, which is that we've got to solve the minimums, the red lines. We have to create the universal truth. For once, for the first time in history, we have to agree on how to live together. And so then I don't think we need to dictate necessarily where everything goes after that. We step back and we don't create powers, right? We don't need them, right? Because once we've got the fundamental minimums in place and we're sharing the resources, it shouldn't be possible to create, you can't hide your knowledge, right? Discoveries are shared. You can't use the discoveries to create asymmetry and basically form a power by knowing more than others. You can't commit cheating because it'd be obvious, picked up. So you're basically left with, we can all survive on the planet. We're going to live sustainably. And what are we going to do with our time? Well, everyone's invested then to basically the same thing.
But do you think current power structures would be willing to give up their power to get us to where you're talking about?
Well, this is why I'm speaking, because this is the thing that keeps me up at night, right? If no one's aware of this game, right? If no one's fully understanding and appreciating the game of life, right, which is survival, okay, and history tells us how we tell ourselves stories and we'll do despicable things. And I come back to COVID on this again. It shows us what we're capable of, and people don't realize what they did. But I mean, I'm unvaccinated, okay, and many people made that choice, and we The sign of a civilization, of decency, right, is that you must have a right to say no. You can never be forced by a collective force, right, and have rights removed, okay, based purely on their perception of your choice, okay? You do, like, there's a lot of mockery around, like, why people made the choice they did. It doesn't matter. In the same way, it shouldn't matter if, gay people want to get married, right? That's absolutely should be the right. What on earth is the problem? Get over yourself, right? They want to have the same rights as others. And that's exactly where we are now. You don't have to agree with the logic, right? It's not your choice, right? But you can't compel others and claim greater good because, and we already know now, it was wrong, right? The things that they said and the reasons for doing it and all the, the stigma and the travel bans, the way. I was literally told by one company, you can come and work in the office, but if we go out for dinner afterwards and you get fined, you'll have to pay it. So, it's just nonsense. People knew this was ridiculous, but nobody was prepared to stand up and say, stop. Why? Because they all thought it was something, if you were vaccine positive, you were happy to go along with it because you thought we were in the wrong. And just in a brief moment of time, we became, we took a step towards something that happened in Germany. And people think they're different, but they're not. The first law the Germans passed, it was the Jews then, right? But they said, well, we're going to sack the Jews. I think it was 1934, it was the first act, and we're going to get rid of the Jews from the civil service, make it more efficient, right? And nobody said anything. Right? No, at this stage, it wasn't living under tyranny. The Nazis necessarily hadn't revealed themselves to be, we weren't at the stage where you could say, I was following orders. Okay? People still had agency and they went along with it because by and large, they agreed. Right? It doesn't matter whether you think you never do it to the Jews. You did it to the unvaccinated. You took a step whereby you decided with a self-appointed, no evidence, people made choices to basically set about reducing the rights of another group of people. Fantastic. Once you've begun that journey, this is where it all falls over, right? And this is where unspeakable evil comes to the end. Because, it makes me laugh that people think dictators by their nature are evil, right? Like the Hitlers are uniquely evil people, or Stalin, uniquely evil. Well, there's countless, they are, they're certainly evil people, don't get me wrong. But you have to think about the system that creates them. If you're cheating in a system, like we've seen coups come and pass, right? But if you take power or acquire power through unfair means or illegal means, then you've begun a journey whereby you have to keep going because you're now in power and you got there by falsehood. So you're going to have to do more cheating to keep that out, keep in power. And then the people that you bring along with you are equally evil, right? And part of it. And if you start going soft and they think, no, maybe you're not doing enough, they're going to kill you. So then you have to become the meanest motherfucker, right? By necessity to keep the fear alive. So, it's not that Hitler had the Germans had this weird moment. You take yourselves collectively on this inch by inch process that sort of just, it takes on a mind of its own.
Snowballs. It spirals. It snowballs. Exactly. And so, any other thoughts, final thoughts for us? I'm just to go back. I was worried, what you were discussing earlier. Do you think you talked about them, and you're not the first person I've heard bring this up, them wanting to provoke us into revolution to, I guess, take down this current system and maybe start something new? Do you think some of these people are willing to start a world war to reset the system?
No. So, you have to remember, the only way if you draw the logical conclusion, as I do, that we're coming to, we won't be able to keep the show on the road. And by the way, there's lots of people in the West will talk about the cost of living crisis. Okay, and there's quite a lot of migrants, going across borders, and look, they are majority male. It doesn't seem that our powers are doing a lot about it, and it's frustrating because we are going through our own hardships, right? But you have to look at it like this: there are 3 billion people who really just have nothing, and when we realize that there's it's not the growth story's over. What do you think they're going to do, right? They're going to walk the earth, right, and invade us. Why are you going to sit there and think in Africa? Here's my phone. I've got internet access. Yeah, I'm happy with their lifestyle compared to mine. I can see no progress whatsoever. They're going to rise. We're citizens in a global world, and the empire is an empire of ours, all of us, and we are invested just as much as they are, and they're going to be the ones that break out first. And so, if you take the conclusion that this is coming to an end, you don't start a world war. And the reason why is because that actually risks the control that I think they've established. These sort of like lockstep moments that just make no sense. Why did Russia and China do lockdowns? I don't understand. That was their time to move. If these countries don't care about their people, it's all about the power, which is what we're told, right? Then lockdowns were the perfect time to move on the West, right? But yeah, China miraculously solved COVID and then made all our PPE. Russia's still supplying the energy in this apparent war in Ukraine, and but if you wanted to bring the West to its knees, you just needs to turn the pipes off. So there's just these sort of when the system you're told exists and the explanation that is offered by experts of how it works produces outcomes that make no logical sense, then the only solution is to say, well, then there's something else in the system. There's a power or a force in the system that's acting on it for another goal. And, the Epstein thing is quite a remarkable thing about that. It's obvious that the Epstein thing is an intelligence operation by someone. There was no actual crimes committed, right? But they've created the concept of public guilt in everyone's minds by feeding you the salacious stories and pilots' logs and stuff. And now anybody who went to that island, who are influential, rich people who may have spoken out about the things that they're seeing, right, and said, hang on, guys, have a look. They're all basically, they know if they speak out, they're going to be, they're going to be thrown to the wolves with, completely fabricated evidence. That's why there's no investigation. There's nothing to find, right?
That's actually an interesting point, which I haven't heard before, which I think can also be plausible. People talk about the Epsteins, and I'm sure that these nasty, unethical, illegal acts with underage, children and stuff does go on in some corners of elites, power structures, and stuff. But I can also see what you're saying plausible, because it's actually a much easier way of doing it, where you don't even have to go to that extreme, and then they can just. I recall the first Mission Impossible movie with Tom Cruise, which I think is the only good one, where they make his parents out to be these criminals. They're just innocent immigrant parents, and he sees them on the news with handcuffs, and they're labeled as drug dealers, which nothing of it is true. And it's kind of like they could just destroy completely using the whole media apparatus. No?
Yeah, well, exactly. So, let's be clear. I think there's corruption all over the world, right, in the top range of power. And one of the reasons why it's not particularly clamped down on is because the people who are corrupt are useful idiots. Okay, there's lots of people that won't have thought of this, the concepts I'm describing today and the challenges we face, right? And they're just self-interested, right? And they're despicable people for what they're doing, because most of them will just be selling out, right? They're not on Team Elite, okay? Some of them are acting to leverage. Many of them are acting just out of greed and will have bribes that are taken and basically are too afraid to admit it. As a consequence, they're doing the work of somebody else, and they have no idea how it adds up. And that's the other risk of being self-interested, is that if you start to deviate, what do you know you've got yourself into? You don't know. It's like compartmentalizing requests and acts. there's people talk about 4D chess. I know we're getting on, but there's a theory. It's called quantum politics, or there's a few different things, but basically, we plugged ourselves into this digital world. Phones have been around for a long time. Maybe that was deliberate, and we have slowly but surely been sharing information. We know they spy on us. What if there is a power that has formed that has a quantum computer, right? And already, and they basically mapped the world. They understand the complexity that I'm sort of alluding to, but we've never been able to map. And they understand things like nodes of significance. So what I mean by nodes is like, you don't need conspiracy in this world to actually achieve an awful lot. What you need is the right environmental parameters to create the stampedes of thought that happen. So look at a good example is COVID, where and Russia as well. But like we see on Twitter and like on the news, we see very little news come out of Russia or China. And those that operate in there, they say they have to operate by this, whatever the Russians say. So in other words, we only know what the Russians allow them to say. And we don't see any content of like day-to-day life. And then when moments of importance come along, whether it's, Navalny dying in Russia, right? And then suddenly we're flooded with these, like, they're queuing up in Russia. And it's like, you have to understand, folks, that, anybody would tell you, but your phones are sources of anecdotal evidence, right? Because very few things on there are official. Like this, we have this problem, right? We actually don't have are some of these things AI? Do we know what is the difference between AI and not? There's lots of things they're hinting at already where like there's clear AI manipulation, but it's so obvious that it's like to hint to maybe say, maybe don't believe everything you read. And, it's quite possible. And I'm going to mention this is my only element of conspiracy, but the Mandela effect, I think, was the moment that you could piece this together, because the pseudoscience they had to rush out and you're constantly told about is just nonsense. So imagine that the internet allows you to segment populations at a total level and provide information that's different. News for your area to help provide control. So we can think that we're at war, potentially, and people in Russia don't know anything about it, right? Because we live there are Chinese wars in terms of the information. And the thing about the way our information flows work is that psychology tells us that if you repeat a message a few times, it doesn't really matter whether you check it or not, you'll believe it. And at the start of COVID, there was the WhatsApp. They stopped you forwarding things as quickly as to many people. That stinks of, basically we were trying to gate natural news or make sure our messages get out there quicker, right? That's slightly dangerous. That's basically saying we want to get the lie into your head first. And then the Mandela effect is one of those things where I think there's a glimpse of this actually in play. And so the Mandela effect, people will know, is the idea that when Mandela died, millions around the world apparently had a false memory, right? That he died in prison in the 80s or whatever. And I've gone through the papers. Nobody actually maps where it happened. Millions happened worldwide, but they don't tell you where. And, it's a bit like saying there are people that think gravity doesn't exist, right? That's not how knowledge works in a dynamic, community. You would come into contact with that knowledge, right? Nelson Mandela was a hugely obvious figure in the West. He was on the new, it's impossible to believe that millions in the West thought he was dead. And when you dig into it, you find that the locations seem to be townships in South Africa. That's where the people have the false memory, which begs the question. When South Africa didn't actually have the internet, until about 2009 or something, there was a fiber cable that connected it. Before then, it was like, they were TV, radio, and news. And what if they didn't, the South African powers that be compartmentalized knowledge to the population? And into townships, the news was produced to say, he's died. this is a time when they were trying to, dampen that sort of revolutionary spirit. So what if the people were told a falsehood to keep the order? And that when they got the internet in 2010, and like it wasn't particularly out in public by then, right? So they weren't going to find out. And then he, suddenly, he sort of disappeared in some, very last days. Suddenly he's died. They get it on the phones that they now have, and then it's like, hang on, I've lived this life, and the pseudoscience of like, how do we have false memories? Like, yes, you can have a false memory. Like people can, but they're very personal memories that people invent. They're not shared. Like it's very hard for millions of people to develop a shared false memory. And people are like, is it CERN and alternative realities? No, I'm pretty sure that there's been information compartmentalization across populations to keep control, and that as we brought them online and access to certain information becomes more available, that they come into contact with these conflicting factual basis, and then hey, Mandela effect, we need to create the pseudoscience. And the fact that it seems to only affect pop culture, right? So like the examples are all pop culture, and everyone goes, oh, I'll go and check. You go to your phone to check, and of course you'll find the digital evidence that tells you, that's exactly how it is. So I think, like I started the conversation, we have to remember to observe and think really hard about what is it we're seeing and how do we perceive it and have we got evidence to tell us it is. And we shouldn't jump to so many assumptions, because I'm convinced we are being, we are in a world that's been manipulated to guide us to a revolution that we must go through. Because in the absence of it, we're heading down a dark path, and it won't end well. And why I've come on and like why I'm sharing this and why I potentially risk the foolery, mockery, is because we have to. Some of it, who's going to hold this group to account? How do we ensure that we're going to a world that's, not, servitude in a second-class status to an elite forever, because there'll be no coming out of this digital prison. It will be foolproof, because they'll have the ability to hold us, to create the asymmetry and power and knowledge and all the rest of it. And I'm convinced that they're showing us these things that we shouldn't be accepting, and they're asking who's going to rise, who is going to realize where we are and what's important and what's not. And I think that's where I am.
That's what Aldous Huxley called the final revolution, as you just mentioned. If we allow them to cement it in, we're completely screwed. I don't usually do 2-hour podcasts, but hey, I'm switching things up lately. And so we're just going to be experimenting here. Where are the best places people can find you? I'll include the links in the description, but I'm guessing, I think Twitter, and you got your website.
So you can find me at Twitter, Pickle Blog. My blog, I haven't shared this on the blog because I was worried about sharing it, and I can go through vast amounts of research and share some of these theories and examples. So I'm going to start writing that again. That's the pickleblog.co.uk. The first 4 parts are the ones that I'm most proud of, and then there's just like closing point. I'm a huge fan of oratory and people, amazing people of the past, and the speeches that they made, and the appeal to the better angels amongst them, to do the right thing. And one of the I'm a huge fan of Robert Kennedy. I mean, JFK's fine, but Robert Kennedy is just the most remarkable person. And I think there's a speech he made. You can look at it on YouTube, but he made it on the evening that Martin Luther King had died. And I just don't think it's possible to imagine it in our society today that anyone would have the courage, or the crowd would have the patience to listen to what he did. And you can tell we don't have people that talk like this anymore. We've given up. And he references that, we come to, he references a poem, that even in our sleep, pain that cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart. And in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom to us by the awful grace of God. The truth is tough, it's hard, it's painful. And, he closes the speech, where, we need to dedicate to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, that our purpose has to be to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. And that's where that is our responsibility. It's not our leaders, it's us. And, it has to begin with starting to call bullshit. And even if that risk costs to you, we have to do it, because literally the fate of the world might rest on it. And it's not even a joke to say it.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim, for your analysis, for your insights, and thank you for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.